And as you all can see Diane's screen. And Diane, go ahead and take it away.
Okay, thank you, John. Welcome, everyone. So basically, I did a webinar on this last fall, and I took the webinar I did last fall and kind of reworked it a little bit because now insurance has become an issue, okay? And I have my contact information here. And let's see. All right, so why would you want to do Google, Anyconnect, single sign-on, and two-factor authentication? I'm going to talk about the advantages and disadvantages of this. I'm going to do a video demonstration and talk about maybe your current arrangement where you're doing local accounts with Active Directory, and then the steps that need to happen in order to move you folks to Google with two-factor authentication. A lot of steps involved, but this is something that you can do yourself if you manage your own firewall, or we can get DIT involved to do this. The testing process, kind of leaving the old stuff in place, adding the new stuff, and then we'll take questions at the end. All right. So the advantages of doing this. Well, if you're doing local authentication, that's kind of a bear because all your users are local. You're having to deal with their password resets. You're having to figure out if somebody remaining in there, if they died, retired, or whatever. We're having to open DIT tickets on that. Active Directory is a little bit better, but it's not truly single sign-on, whereas Google is truly single sign-on. Also, this requires a commercial cert, like from GoDaddy, Entrust, whatever. If your current firewall is giving you error messages when you try to connect, saying certificate does not match server name, untrusted source, and all that, that will go away if you move to Google on this. The audit trail is better than any audit trail like with local or Active Directory, and we're also going to look at the audit trail. Unlike Active Directory, you would be doing true two-factor authentication because it's tied to Google, where there's two-factor authentication involved. And the one thing I added on this presentation compared to last fall's is lower insurance rates. So I guess that's kind of a plus there. Okay. The disadvantages. It requires use of a purchase CA cert. It's less than $100 annually if you get one from GoDaddy. If your insurance rates are going to go up by 50% or whatever, or not potentially decrease, it's probably a good trade-off there that you have to get a certificate for this. So I just found some information online about why the insurance companies are doing this. A lot of insurance companies are saying, we're going to go up on your rates if you don't do this, or if you do this, we might go down in your rates. And the idea of having, as you're seeing here, insurance companies maybe fight over your business would be an interesting idea. I don't know if you get competitive bids, but that's an interesting idea. Okay, let's see. Okay, the federal government did a study and they are saying that more or less, if sites or companies have a dog in the fight, they're having to have their insurance rates go up versus putting in some effort, that this might incent them to put in some effort to avoid having their insurance rates go up. Okay. And let's see. We're not encouraging people to go to this particular insurance company, but the insurance company called Coalition that does cyber insurance, they're saying that multi-factor authentication can block up to 99.9% of automated cyber attacks, but very few people are doing that. Like only 28% of people are doing multi-factor authentication. And with this particular company, they're giving folks an insurance rate decrease up to $10,000. Okay, so there are more options than Google for doing multi-factor authentication. This particular website lists some of them. It seemed to show a pretty good comparison of the different companies. They even showed pricing. The first one they listed was Duo. MCNC actually uses Duo. So when John and I need to do any kind of remote VPN using Anyconnect, it is tied to our local Active Directory, but we also have to use Duo, a little app on the phone. And I looked at the pricing on Duo and it said $3. That was for their bottom tier. And I thought, well, that's a pretty good deal, $3, you know. But then I looked closer and it's $3 a month, and that's per user. Okay. So John and I weren't specifically involved in setting up MCNC, Anyconnect with Duo and AD. But if you're wanting to do that, we could probably put you in touch with whoever did that. But the advantage of Google is it doesn't cost anything except for that search pricing of the $100 a year. Okay, so I'm going to do a video demo of this. I'll bring this up here. All right. So this shows two-factor authentication. Well, actually, it shows tying to Google in action, and some of this is going to be two-factor. So you can see where our firewall is called gaps.k12.nc.us. I've only got one user logged in, and they're our network administrator. So they're going to choose the IT staff pull down, and we're going to tell Google we're going to log in. Okay, and the firewall is now saying, welcome to the network. That message is coming from the ASA. Okay, and we've got our network segmented as far as who gets in to do what. We don't have much of a network, but you can see where our administrator is able to get into the entire lab, and our administrator can ping the core switch. And that's what we wanted here. Okay, we're going to disconnect as our administrator and then show how this would work if we come in as a different user. It's a little twitchy when we're doing this all on one PC. Your users typically wouldn't be doing this on one PC and getting strange error messages and so on. All right, so we're going to use a different account, and this is going to be our this is going to be our air conditioning person here. And we only want for this person to be able to get to the air conditioning equipment. And this person could choose the pull down, but they're going to do something a little different. They can do just /HVAC because they know that's their pull down. They're going to hit the button here. And it says, well, which one of these are you? And they're carrier. And the firewall says, welcome to the HVAC. And we're going to bring up our Anyconnect to show that our route doesn't include the whole network. It just includes the heating and air conditioning equipment, 2 devices there. Okay. We go over to our DOS prompt, and you can see where our heating and air conditioning person cannot get to the core switch. And that's what we want there. All right, so we're going to disconnect as the heating and air conditioning person. And now we're going to come in as the chief financial officer. Now our chief financial officer doesn't have Anyconnect loaded yet, okay? So we're going to remove our carrier person. And we told the chief financial officer, you're going to have to go out and hit the web page and download Anyconnect so that in the future you can just use the little icon there. So they're going to connect. They're our only user currently in Google at this point. We're going to go over to the web page. And we'll see all the pull downs on our web page. And they're going to choose our finance there. Log in, and kind of like magic, Anyconnect goes over, checks that SAML cookie, realizes that they're our only user logged in, therefore they must be our user. And this enables our chief financial officer to download Anyconnect. So I'm not going to download Anyconnect here because I've already got it in my machine, but this would be what you do for a user that doesn't already have Anyconnect. Okay. So you're saying, well, some of our users though are students. What's to keep these students out of doing VPN? And we don't want to turn on 2-factor for our students. We don't want them in the network at all. So we're going to try with our nemesis, Big Cootie, to see what happens when Big Cootie tries to connect. So Big Cootie is going to try and get into the AS400 or the finance network or whatever. And we've got a new little icon for Big Cootie, his mem there. And he's going to type in finance here. And when he tries to connect, we're going to get an error message, which we'll look at later in Google, and so we can understand why Big Cootie is getting this error message. Okay, so we have foiled Big Cootie once again. And we're going to log out as Big Cootie. And then we're going to have a look at the whole two-factor authentication piece. Okay. We have it set up for this user called two-factor. Not very imaginative there. All right, so two-factor's got their password stored here, which you can turn on and off in Google as far as when we are allowing them to do that. And I'm having to get my phone out here and enter the 6-digit code from Google Authenticator. You can use Google Authenticator, you can use text messages, whatever. You can see where this is two-factor authentication. Our two-factor user is in. Okay. And now we're going to hit connect because we were already connected as our CFO. We're going to come in as two-factor. And our two-factor authentication person is now connected. Okay. Now, when we bring up our Anyconnect, we're going to look at the routes here, and we see where there are 4 devices that our finance people can get to inside our network. And our finance people cannot get into the heating and air conditioning or the whole network. Okay. And last but not least, we're going to look at what you typically are seeing on your firewall. Here I'm connecting to Gans Firewall, where he does not have a commercial cert. Okay. And these are the messages you're probably used to seeing at on your firewall if you do not have a commercial cert. Certificate does not match the server name. Certificate is from an untrusted source. Okay. So by moving this over to Google and having a commercial cert, we would not see those error messages anymore. Okay. So I'm going to minimize that. That was our video demo. So here we're talking about how you're currently doing things. You might currently be using the local ASA database. You might currently be doing Active Directory, but this demonstration and talk is about Google's single sign-on. So if you're currently using Active Directory, over to the right, we have our Anyconnect user. They connect to the Cisco ASA. Then the ASA uses a service account to talk to your Active Directory. And depending on the security groups in Active Directory, your users can get to different parts of the network. You probably have different pull downs in your ASA, and your HVAC user who's in the security group HVAC can get to the HVAC. Your net admin can get to the whole network. Your finance people can get just to the AS400, okay? So that might be your current arrangement. But if we flip this all to Google, our Anyconnect user over to the right connects to the ASA, and instead of talking to an Active Directory server in the back end, your Cisco ASA is talking to Google. And as you saw, we had the different pull downs for Google, and we had our different users in Google. And depending on how Google is configured, and we'll look at that, they can get to different parts of the network. Oops. Okay. All right. So what has to happen in order to move to Google? Well, our first thing would be to come up with a meaningful name for the firewall. And a lot of you folks are going with the name that DIT is using. It might be like K125999-FW, K12.NC.US, or your firewall might not resolve at all, okay? You need to think about DNS. In other words, firewall.myschool.org might be a user-friendly name for your firewall. Ours is GAPS, and it's gaps.k12.nc.us. So that's something easy for your users to remember. So first thing to take care of would be DNS, to make sure you've got a good name for your firewall. We might manage your DNS And I think everybody knows Zeb Kaler here. He's our DNS person. He can work with you on most anything DNS, and John's also good at DNS. So you need to have a good, meaningful name that resolves. Network time protocol must also work on the firewall. It probably is already working. That's something we would get going with DIT, because the certs have certain times that they are good for, like they're good for a year. Okay, so that would take care of your DNS issue. After you've decided on a meaningful name for your firewall and everything resolves, we would need to do a certificate signing request, because we need to have a commercial cert on the firewall. A certificate signing request is also known as a CSR, and 5 elements are needed for that. One would be the fully qualified name of your firewall, your company name, you know, like my school or grade school, country US, state North Carolina, and the location. You could do the street address and the town, or probably just the town. It doesn't much matter. But those 5 elements are needed for the certificate signing request. Okay. Either you can generate the certificate signing request with those 5 elements and, you know, doing that in the firewall. And we have instructions here for how to do that, or we could have DIT do that. Okay, so if you open a ticket with us to do that, we need those 5 elements. All right. So with that certificate signing request, you would purchase the CS or the actual commercial cert. Now, my examples are showing GoDaddy. We gave this a lot of study. We looked at pricing, we looked at user friendliness. When I was at Cisco, everybody used GoDaddy. So I'm familiar with GoDaddy. Everybody's familiar with GoDaddy. But if you're used to using Entrust or Netscape or somebody else, that's fine. We're just using the example GoDaddy. So you need to get an account with a vendor. You would pay for the cert, and it might require domain verification. If it requires domain verification, that is something we can help with. It usually involves a text record in your domain. John can help with that. Zeb, I can usually muddle through that to do the domain verification first, or GoDaddy can help you with that. All right, so assuming it's GoDaddy, they would give you a zip file at the end of this process after you'd paid for the certificate, and it will have 3 certificates within that zip file. The certificates actually need to be installed. Okay, so installing the certificates. Again, it could be do-it-yourself install. We have instructions on doing that, or it can be DIT install. We'd probably still have the ticket open, assuming it didn't take forever to get the certificate. We would just send the zip file to DIT, and they would install the certificates. Out of the 3 certificates in the bundle, one is used for the CA certificate, another one is used for the identity certificate, and the third one doesn't get used. It's like a bonus certificate, okay? At the point when the certificate is installed on the ASA, when you do Anyconnect to the firewall, it should not give you errors. You shouldn't see those annoying messages you're used to seeing. And we shouldn't have any problems with authentication, but we're not there as far as the Google piece goes yet. It's just you shouldn't get those annoying errors you're used to getting. Okay, so we're at the point where our firewall is in good shape. We're not getting the errors anymore, but we need to integrate this with Google. So in Google, we need to go into security, single sign-on with Google as SAML IDP, and download the certificate. Okay. After downloading the certificate, somebody's going to need to install the certificate. It can be do it yourself, or else we'll have DIT do it. I'm just doing this from the command line. You would declare a trust point. I would just give it the name Google for simplicity. You're going to be doing terminal enrollment. Don't check on the CA. We're going to call the name of the certificate Google, and you would bring up the certificate, the CA certificate the Google certificate that you just downloaded. It has a beginning and an end in that. You're going to slap that in the firewall. It will give you a warning about, are you sure you want to do this? And then you just exit and write mem. At that point, when you do show cry CA trust point, you should see that there. You should see the Google certificate there. Okay. So we
Hey,
have the Google.
Diane.
Yep.
We got two questions here real fast
Mhm.
before you go to the next thing. One is, would a wildcard cert work for this with the DNS and everything?
A wildcard cert will work according to Cisco. Okay. The reason why we didn't do a wildcard cert here is our firewall is gaps.k12.nc.us. If we did a wildcard cert for star.k12.nc.us, it would conceivably work on any firewall in North Carolina. But our security team was concerned because not only would it work on any firewall in North Carolina, but if a student managed to get, or if the cert managed to get in the wrong hands, that could be potentially a problem. Now, obviously, whoever was doing this would also have to hijack DNS. We didn't think it was highly probable that that would happen. Another issue is if you're doing Apple apparently needs the subject alternative name in the wildcard cert. Okay. So, but according to Cisco doesn't care. So that's short answer to your question, or long answer to your question. Okay.
All right. And then one other question was, are you aware of anyone that's using this with firepower and ICE or ISE?
Well, if we did it with firepower and ICE, so you're talking about doing like Radius or TACX probably. I would think. That's something we could talk about offline. So tying Anyconnect into firepower and ICE.
Yeah, we can talk with Charles offline about that one.
Yeah. Okay. I think we probably could, but I'm pretty sure the DIT ties the current logins to that, but we can talk about that offline. Yeah.
Okay. Go ahead and continue on. Thank you.
All right, no problem. All right, so we got the certificate from Google there. All right, now we need to get two strings off of the Google. Okay. Again, they're under security single sign-on with Google, a SAML IDP. We need to pull out the single sign-on URL and the entity ID. Again, it's going to be either do it yourself or have DIT do this. But we're going to go into our firewall and add Google as an IDP. So I'm assuming the web VPN is already configured on the firewall. We're not going to do that from scratch, but we go into the web VPN area, and DIT is telling me you can now do this with ASDM, and that's how they did it. We've had one of these set up so far with DIT. So we're going to define the IDP, and you see where that string that we pulled from Google is going to get entered there. And the SSO URL from Google is going to get entered there. Then the base URL is going to be our firewall, our fully qualified name. The trust point is going to be Google, which is what we named it when we got the certificate on there. Since we have a GoDaddy cert, we call our trust point GoDaddy when we did that piece of it. Okay. The problem we ran into in doing this from the command line, I don't know if it's a problem from the GUI, is when you have a question mark, you have to do Control V and then the question mark, because that's a reserved character for Cisco. And that ate our lunch several times, especially when it took us about 6 months to get this to start to start with. Okay. So they may have improved on that a little bit. All right. So once you've done that, then you write mem, because this is only defining the IDP or the identity provider. Okay. Everything should still work with your existing scheme. So we're at the point where everything's still working with our existing scheme. We're making a little progress, but we're going to want to move from our existing scheme, which I'm showing up top, to a new scheme. We don't want to bother your existing users who are used to these pull downs, admin, AD teachers, local, not AD, but we're going to add the Google stuff because we're in a testing phase where we're having to get these people used to two-factor, that we're having to get them used to using Google, having to get our heating and air conditioning people on board and so on. So we're going to have not just 3 pull downs, but we're going to have 3 plus 3 in our example. Okay, that's what we're moving towards. And you saw in the video where there were different ways that we could connect. We could use the pull down to connect. We added in for whatever our users, I think they did /finance to connect. You saw where a chief financial officer used the web to connect. They could use the web and add /finance to connect. But no matter how they connect there's certain strings they get sent from the firewall to Google. And in our example, where we have the 3 pull downs, there are 2 strings that get sent potentially to Google for each pull down. So where our admin G user was connecting, and I think it was called IT staff actually in our video, we have our firewall name, our fully qualified firewall name that is part of the string, and then the pull down is part of the string. Our firewall name, the pull down, our firewall name, and so on. So for each pull down, we're going to need these set of strings. And that's what the ASA sends to Google. And there's a corresponding SAML app in Google for each one of these, because you saw how we had the heating and air conditioning people, the finance people, and the net admins. So we're going to have 3 SAML apps in Google, and they're each configured a little bit differently because the strings sent from the ASA are different. So we're going to go through just one of these in our Google. We're going to go in apps, web and mobile apps to add one app. It's going to be a custom SAML app. And we're going to call it admin-G. We could have called it anything, but we're going to make it match the pull down in our example. Okay, on the next screen, we're going to hit continue, and then we're going to enter the strings the ASA sends to the Google format. Okay, and you saw a couple slides ago where we had the firewall name in there, we had the pull down name, we had the firewall name, we had the pull down name. Okay, that's the correlation because the ASA is sending these to Google. Down at the bottom, the attribute is going to be email, which is kind of a no-brainer. Okay. Once we've hit finish on there, we have to apply the SAML app to the OU or the group. So we can apply it at the OU level. If it's to go to all the teachers or all the admins and they're all in one OU, we can do it at that level. Or we can do it at the group level. If we've got finance people all over the district, we can create a membership in a mailing list, more or less, and then say we're going to apply it at the group level. Or we could do it, both. Or we can use some combination of them. Okay. So right now mine is off for everybody. You're going to turn it on for groups or OUs. So that's our piece of Google that is done in Google. Now we're going to go into the firewall. So in the firewall, we have to do a group policy and a tunnel group. We're going to make this match Google just for simplicity. So our group policy is called admin G. It's got attributes. You kind of recognize where it said, welcome to the network that we saw in our video. That's coming from the firewall. The DNS server value, I mean, these are in your existing VPN. You just have to replicate these. The tunnel group, for simplicity, we called it the same thing. You recognize the string that we showed was being sent over from the ASA, or the ASA. This is what's getting sent over to Google. And in here, we have an access list. For the admins, we wanted for them to get to the entire network. It's possible if you have an existing pull down, you would just be replicating this from the existing pull down and reusing that access list. If you were going to do down to the port level, you can also do a VPN filter value. We don't have folks commonly doing this, but if we wanted to lock people down to the port level, you can do a VPN filter value in there. Okay, that's optional. And so we configured these 2 things. And at that point, when we connect to the firewall, we write mem and we connect to the firewall, we should see admin G added to our old pull downs in there. And at that point, we can test using Google. So in terms of the grand scheme, we maybe have Alice in group A in Google, or in OU admins in Google. We have Frank in group F or OU payroll. We have Helen in group H or OU heating. Okay, right now we just added admin G. We're going to do some testing on that before we get cranking on these others. Okay, our users, our Anyconnect users, they hit the ASA, and you can see where our different users are going to Google right now. We just got it set up for Alice and admin G. If it works for Alice, then we'd have to go in and perform that same operation for our payroll, our heating and air conditioning person for their pull downs. Okay. All right. So as far as turning on two-step verification in Google, that's not really the topic of this, but I do have a link to how to turn it on. It's pretty easy to turn on. Google will show you how you can also say whether or not you want the users to be able to trust the device. In other words, will this remain persistent, or are you going to have them authenticate every time they get into the device? How often they're going to do the two-step verification and so on. This is not really a function of the firewall. It's more a function of Google. Okay. And John can probably help you with that or answer questions. I mean, I turned it on our lab thing and it worked fine and so on. Okay. All right. I mentioned about how there are additional access lists to control who can get to what with the group policy, the split tunnel, the port level access list that you can do. Okay. So to sum it up, if you're interested in doing this, the things we would need for opening a ticket with DIT would be the DNS, the fully qualified domain name, the 5 elements for the certificate signing request. Once DIT's gotten that back to you, you would pay for the certificate and have the zip file from the vendor. We would get them over to DIT. You would download the Google certificate for DIT and those 2 strings that we saw that needed to come over from Google. You would let us know what the pull down name should be. And it could be there'd be a 1-to-1 correlation between your existing pull downs and what you're going to move to in Google. If not, maybe you need to think about how we're going to do this and change that and so on. Okay. It might be a good time to kind of revisit your security policy. Let's see. And then, oops, sorry about that. And then the inside access for each pull down. Okay, how you want that set up, because we can work with DIT on this. All right, and last but not least, the audit trail, which I think is really cool. Okay, so this is the audit trail from Google. My only objection was it seemed to take, I don't know, like 8 hours or a day for this to appear in Google, but it finally does appear. And you can see where in this example, our user called Carrier, you saw where they're a heating and air conditioning user. They decided they were going to try and sneak into the AS400. So they chose the wrong pull down, either unintentionally or intentionally. And you can see the 4th column here where we have an IP address. That's the actual IP address of where that user was when they tried to do that. And this is the my AT&T Uverse at my house. That's what's showing up in that column because that's where I was trying to hack in as, okay? If we compare that to Active Directory audit trail, this is Gans Firewall, which we kind of looked at briefly. You see where in Active Directory, instead of showing us the user who tried to do this, it just shows unknown username or bad password. Okay, if a bad username tried to get in, okay? And you also see the source network IP address is 192.168.57.1. That is the inside address of Gans Firewall. And since the firewall, in the case of AD, is acting like a proxy or a user where it's like a service account, okay? It's not going to actually show me trying to get into Gans Firewall. It shows the inside address of the firewall as a service account sending that incorrect username and password. Okay, so it's not very user friendly when it comes to figuring out where that user was actually trying to hack in from. Okay. All right. So we can entertain questions here.
Great. So, Diane, I've actually unmuted or made it to where everyone can unmute themselves to ask a question. But to kick us off, Eddie has asked a question of, as far as general two-factor authentication is concerned, what is the best practice for the amount of time to trust a device? So I'm guessing, you're logging in to your machine or for two-factor authentication, logging into your machine. By default, Google is 30 days, but you can adjust that to a shorter amount of time or something else if you wanted to, or not even trust a device if you wanted to. But do we have a thought as to best practice on that? How long?
I don't. I mean, that's kind of came up yesterday. I guess it maybe depends on the insurance company. I don't know. I mean, you would probably have a user revolt if you had them authenticating, every hour or every day or whatever. There might be some sweet spot, maybe telling them, hey, this is coming, you need to get used to it, and then tightening the screws later on as far as the frequency. I don't know.
And then I've had several questions come in about getting access to the presentation as well as the recording. At this moment, I'm going to ask you guys to shoot me an email if you would like to get a copy of the recording as well as the slides. And what we'll do is we'll email that out to everyone. Due to we didn't get to do a registration form or anything like that with this one, it's going to be a little different for us. So if you can just shoot me an email, either myself or Diane an email, and we can get you that.
Yeah, I'm not seeing, the chat's like missing on mine, but I do have this shared to anybody who has the link. If John, if you want to maybe put the link in chat to SAML Insurance, the PowerPoint, if folks just want to look at that, I did share that to everybody in the internet if they have the link.
Yeah, I'll grab that link real quick and shoot that out to everyone.
Yeah, I'm keeping a spreadsheet with folks who've approached us about this. I think we've got maybe a dozen people in the spreadsheet thus far, and I'm kind of tracking as far as, okay, so-and-so's got the DNS done, so-and-so's getting a cert and all that. If we've got a bunch of people interested, it's something we probably should get started on and don't wait till June 30th when the insurance year starts or ends, whatever.
Any other questions? And like I said, you guys are able to unmute yourselves to ask your questions now too.
Okay, and if folks can let me know about, there was that firepower and ICE question, I can look into that if you just contact me offline. Okay, well, I'll put my contact information here. If there are no more questions, just we'll call it a morning here. Okay, well, thank you to everyone for attending. Okay.